All right, welcome to the SnydeReport. I am your host, Gary Snyder. My guest today, I don't know if you probably know his name, you probably know his company, but the face on the other side of me right now is it CEO and president, or what do you go by, Jeff?
Whatever they want to call me. I guess founder, CEO, chairman, whatever the title is of the day.
Of Emmis Communications. So, welcome to the SnydeReport, Jeff.
My pleasure, Gary. My pleasure.
Well, and we were talking off air. I did wear my Notre Dame shirt for the USC guy today.
Yeah. Yeah, I get a lot of Notre Dame people in Indiana. There are not many Trojans in Indiana.
Well, and I do have to relay a message to you. I was speaking to our mutual friend Evan By a little earlier today,
Oh yeah.
and I told him that Jeff Smulyan was coming on the SnydeReport today, and he's like, "Boy, you're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now, aren't you?"
Boy, that is exactly right. That Evan knows of what he speaks. Absolutely positive. Evan and I have been dear friends for a long, long time. One of the
Yeah, he did mention that,
yeah,
so probably longer than well, I don't know that I've been alive, but
pretty close. Pretty close.
well, Jeff, I'm glad you came on today because you are kind of the mastermind behind the curtain of one of America's largest radio conglomerates, stations, or however you want to put it. So
Yeah.
I wanted to bring you on and just find out what makes Jeff Smulyan tick and how did you get to where you are today. But my first question is, your last name is Smulyan.
Right.
Your company was Emmis Communication. Where did we get the name Emmis at?
Well, Emmis was also a book I was writing called The Emmis Region, but it's the Hebrew word for truth. And I always thought it would be a neat thing to name the company. And so I called it Emmis, which stands for truth. And hopefully it gives all of us standards by which to live.
Now, how did you get started in radio?
I always loved it. It was my hobby. I always loved radio, listened to radio. I used to joke that I was one of those kids from my generation who would listen late at night to top 40 radio stations or baseball games. And when our parents came in the room, you'd hide the radio under the pillow. And I've told that story, and I can't tell you how many other friends in the industry had the same exact life. So I always loved it. I was a telecom major in college, actually history and telecom. Always wanted to be an entrepreneur. Always did what I wanted to do. I had my first job at ABC Radio when I was in college after I'd been a sports writer at the Indianapolis Star for 3 summers. And just always loved it, was going to get a master's in telecom. And several people said, well, go to law school and study broadcast law, and that'll prepare you to be an entrepreneur. And Gary, I have to laugh. Today, if you ask 100 people what to do to prepare for being an entrepreneur, they'd say, get an MBA, get a business degree. But in those days, it was like, no, get a law degree. And I'm glad I did. I learned more, about understanding how to allocate resources and understanding competing interests from law school. I always joke I've been on inactive status for the State Bar of Indiana for the last 45 or 50 years. And I always said if I actually had to practice law, they would just bar me on the spot. They'd say, oh my God, we can't have you practicing law. But it was great background.
How'd you end up in Indiana?
Well, it wasn't my fault. I had
It's none of our faults.
great grandparents who landed here about 130 years ago. And this was the home. And I went to school in California and I thought, well, I'll never come back. And my dad talked me into coming back. For the first 6 months, I came back and I said, what have I done here? But I really settled in and really enjoy the life. It's a great community. I've had a chance to get involved in a number of things, and I'm very proud to be a Hoosier and to have had a small role in some of the things that we've been able to do down here.
Now, you still have an office down on the Circle, right?
We do. We're in the process of selling it because as we sold our radio stations, we really don't have a need for a building this big because most of our businesses that we now have are out of town.
Mm-hmm.
But I've loved being on the Circle, and if we move somewhere, it'll probably be close to the Circle. Love being in the heart of downtown.
I would imagine that's pretty extraordinary, especially when you got the lights up at Christmas time.
It's great. If I look over my shoulder, I'm looking right at the monument. My computer is basically facing the wall, but if I look over my shoulder, I'm looking right at the monument.
When you When you look back at your time in radio, you mentioned you wrote for the Indy Star for about 3 years as a sports
Yeah.
writer.
Yeah.
Did not like writing, or you just preferred radio?
Always loved writing. I wrote this crazy book a couple years ago, um, during actually, I guess, at the end of COVID. Always loved writing, but my first love was the radio business, and loved it. As Emmis grew, we've been in all sorts of things. We've been in radio, TV, magazines, international radio. We got actually nationalized by Viktor Orban in Hungary, which is a long, boring story. Um, but always loved it. And my first love was radio. It kind of breaks my heart. The industry has struggled an awful lot now, but always loved the business.
Did was a song out called "Video Killed the Radio Star"? Did streaming kill the radio service?
Well, it wasn't really streaming. It was kind of death by a thousand cuts. And radio's still there. Still a tremendous amount of people listen to radio every day, but it's declined a bit, and advertisers' perception of radio is less. So it's still a vibrant, a viable business. It's just it has not had growth. And when a business doesn't grow, it creates all sorts of challenges.
Now, in the radio business, you tend to be, I don't know, maybe an independent, maybe a little left of center politically.
Yeah, that's probably conservative.
I'm
So
sorry.
I may be that may be a conservative assessment. I may be a little bit left of center, but it depends. My general counsel Scott Enright kids me, and he says you only named it Emmis because Pravda was taken. I'm not really a secret Bolshevik, but my politics have really been the same my whole life, Gary. I am, listen, I'm a Democrat. I'm a proud Democrat. I have been active in causes. When you run a business, you understand economics, so I may be a little bit more conservative on economics, but I've been a proud Democrat my whole life. And I doubt if I'm going to have an epiphany and become a MAGA supporter at this stage of my life.
I'm a little bit younger, and I doubt if I have that epiphany too.
Hmm.
So let me ask you this, because your radio stations throughout the years, you've had talk radio stations,
Yeah.
you've carried conservative voices
Yeah.
on some of your stations.
Yeah.
How is that setting from an owner standpoint, knowing your politics and knowing what's playing on your station?
I will tell you a great story. A number of years ago, we bought these stations from the Johnson family in Austin, Texas. We bought
Hmm.
all their radio stations. And I talked to Lucy, and she said, Jeff, do you ever go to a cocktail party? And I knew and I laughed. I said, Lucy, yes. The question is, you go to parties and people say, I know your politics. How can you have this lunatic on the air or that lunatic? And she said, people would come to me and say, Lucy, your father was president of the United States. He was a pillar of the Democratic Party. How can you have Rush Limbaugh on your radio stations? And we both laughed about it. I've always said, look, you have to run a business, to make money. There is not an audience for liberal talk in American radio. People who are more progressive either listen to NPR, although I shouldn't say that now because that plays into the Trump narrative, or they listen to rock and roll, or they listen to all news. So it has become the bailiwick of the conservative right. It kind of breaks my heart because we have these bubbles. And if you listen to conservative radio or you watch Fox News or OAN or Newsmax, you don't get information from anything else. Debates with conservative friends, and I said, let me buy you a year-long subscription to the New York Times just so you get a different point of view. And they go, I would never leave the Times. It's all lies. And so that's where we are. But I always said, look, I believe strong in the First Amendment, and I believe people who are on the right have the right to express their point of view. And if that was the audience that we reached, so be it.
Can you hold through a break, Jeff?
Absolutely.
You're listening to the Snide Report with Gary Snyder. All right, this is the part of the Snide Report where we thank our sponsors, and we have a growing list. So let's start with Robin Winston. Robin has been there when we first sent out our first email, 147 subscribers. We're now over 108,000. So thank you, Robin Winston, and helping us get the podcast going in the right direction. Next up is our good friend, former Congresswoman Jill Long Thompson. Her book, Across the Aisle, Why Bipartisanship Works for America. Get that anywhere you buy your books. Also, former two-term governor, two-term U.S. Senator Evan Bayh. Evan has been a sponsor of the newsletter, now jumps on board with the podcast. Congressman Andre Carson. Congressman Carson has been there from the start. We're glad to have him over here on the newsletter now. He needs your help to win re-election next year, so make sure you support Congressman Carson. Next up, State Representative Cherish Pryor. Cherish has been there from the start on the newsletter, joining us on the podcast now. So is State Senator Greg Taylor. I want to thank Senator Taylor for all of his support through the years. Next, we have a couple of new sponsors. First up is Indiana Citizen. You want to check out their new project, One Heartbeat Away. Do Christian nationalists have an agenda for Indiana? You know, all you have to do is look at the lieutenant governorship and you can see right away that they do. So thank you, Indiana Citizen. Next up is Jump Laundry. You can visit them at jumplaundry.com. They have home pickup. They do your dry cleaning, wash and fold with, I might add, no judgments, and next day service. So if you're in a crunch for time, you don't want to do your own laundry, get a hold of Jump Laundry at jumplaundry.com or at 317-740-5011, and they will take care of all of your laundry needs. Welcome back to the Snide Report. I am your host, Gary Snyder. With me today is Emmis Communications president, CEO, founder, brain trusts, all that good stuff, Jeff Smulyan. Jeff, you've been in radio most of your life. What's your favorite radio format?
Well, the one I'm identified with, is starting all sports radio. That was something that I always kidded I was thinking about doing in a class when I wasn't paying attention at USC many, many years ago. And we had a chance to buy an AM. We bought the stations from Doubleday, and it came with an AM in New York. And I said to our people, I'd like to do all sports here. And they looked at me and said, "You're out of your mind." We ended up putting it on the air. It was not successful the first year and a half. Jim Lampley called it the Vietnam War of Emmis. It was known as Smulyan's Folly. And then it turned around and it became, an iconic format. Today, I think there's 700 radio stations around the country. And I always get requests about, I guess I'm known as the father of sports radio. And people say, "Did you think there'd be 700 all sports radio stations someday?" And I said, "I didn't think there'd be one based on our early experience." But I love that. I've loved all sorts of formats. I always loved Top 40. I love, oldies and, so I just loved the business, loved all the things that made the business work.
What does Jeff Smulyan listen to? What music does he listen to when he's not running Radio Empire?
I mean, I listen to things like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Jackson Browne and Kenny Loggins. Rick Cummings, who's been with me forever, is head of all of our programming and probably knows more about programming than anybody who ever lived, who said, "The only thing we want to do is not build a radio station around Jeff Smulyan's music because we'd go bankrupt." So I have my own taste, but it's kind of fun.
You were an owner of a major. Well, let me do this first.
Yeah.
You're sitting there in Indianapolis. Thoughts on the Pacers run this year and last night's game?
Well, I'm a giant Pacer fan. I've had the same seats on the floor for the last 35 years. One of my great joys was in Game 6. I had all three kids together, and they live in different cities, and we all sat there. I love the team. It broke my heart. The reality that not only do we lose the seventh game, but Tyrese will probably be out most of next year, has settled in today, and it's just heartbreaking. It was such a great team and such a great run. And, I gave a speech 1,000 years ago that said nothing unites a community like a winning sports team. And you could go, a friend of mine sent me a note, said they were in Kroger yesterday in Fishers, and somebody said, "Go Pacers," and the whole grocery store erupted with people cheering for the Pacers. And it was such a great run and so much fun. And to see it end the way it ended last night broke my heart, but that's life. You're going to have that. I just hope Tyrese is able to come back because he's been just a great ambassador and a great basketball player.
Is Miles Turner on his way to LA?
I don't think so. I would have bet any amount of money before last night he would not be, that they were going to keep him and keep this team together as they should. Now without Tyrese, I still think they'll keep it together. I think they'll try to keep it together and play as well as they can, and hopefully he comes back in February or so, or March, and they have another run. This team is clearly as good as anybody in basketball.
Now, my son has played the national anthem several times over the years.
Yeah.
And he did play it for Game 5 this year against the Milwaukee Bucks.
Oh, wow.
The electric guitar thing. And I'm telling you right now, because we took him down to Indy a couple times to do some things, and even he was recognized for doing the anthem for a Pacer game.
It's just been such a unifying factor. The whole town rallied against them. It's a likable team. They all love each other, and they came so far. You just hope they keep them together, and you hope Tyrese comes back for part of next season, and they pick up where they left off.
You owned the Seattle Mariners.
Yeah.
Why Seattle, and were there any ever thoughts of trying to get them in here in Indianapolis?
I originally got involved with a group that wanted to buy a team and move it here. What I learned quickly, after we had done all sports radio in New York, we had bought all the major market radio stations we could. And people in baseball said, what we need are marketing people. We have a marketing challenge in Seattle. I looked at it. I had been to Seattle and loved the city. Thought it was a great place. And I always kid. I've always said the best management we ever did was running that team. They had their first winning team. We did marketing things that nobody had ever done. But in those days in baseball, you really needed to be a billionaire to own a team of that size. I always joke, if you had a paper route, you could own the Yankees or the Dodgers. But to own the Mariners in those days, we couldn't afford the losses. So I loved it, made great friends, learned a lot, and it was just one of those things.
Any attempts after that to get back into sports ownership?
Oh yeah, we almost got the Minnesota Vikings. It's a long story. Turned down a chance to take over the Houston Rockets, which my friend David Stern never let me forget as long as he was alive. And bid on the Nationals and didn't get them, and turned down a chance to buy the Dodgers. I think that's one of the things I wrote the book, just to explain all the crazy things that we did and didn't do.
Well, here's your chance. Take a minute and promote that book, because now I want a copy.
The book is called Never Ride a Roller Coaster Upside Down, and it was written at the behest of my now senior daughter, who I would take to school every day from kindergarten until she got her driver's license and fired me. And we would talk about life every day. And one day she said, Dad, nobody believed these stories. You got to tell them. And so during COVID, I just started writing, and I had more fun, and I sent it off to a couple people, and I said, you got a book here. So a friend of mine said, I'll get you an editor. I had an editor who was fabulous. We worked through everything. Got an agent, got a publisher, and wrote it. And I had a lot of fun with it. I kid that I did the audio book. Somebody said, who was your biggest client? I said, it was the CIA. The CIA bought 200 copies of my audio book, and they went to Guantanamo and they told prisoners, you can either listen to Smulyan for 10 hours or be waterboarded. And all of a sudden, everybody said, we'll be waterboarded. But I had a lot of fun with the book. It was a very, very gratifying experience. So yeah, it's called Never Ride a Roller Coaster Upside Down. And it just talks about what happened with the Dodgers and what happened with things in the radio industry. And hopefully the thing that's been gratifying is people learned a lot reading it about life and management and people, and it also made people laugh a number of times. So I'm happy with it.
A lot happening in Indiana and the United States and across the world right now.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on what's transcribing or happening over in the Middle East right now, and even here in the U.S.?
Well, it's interesting. I am absolutely not a fan of Netanyahu. I'm obviously an American Jew. I support Israel totally. I have grave questions with that government. One of my jobs, Gary, was I was an ambassador under President Clinton and in charge of the International Telecommunications Union. And during that time, as luck would have it, the Arab states wanted to negotiate with the United States to get telecommunications infrastructure for Palestine. And in exchange for that, they would agree to represent Israel for the first time in the United Nations system. And now remember, this was in 1994 after Oslo. And after Oslo, you thought you were well on your way to a two-state solution and we would never have these problems. It's hard to believe how far away we've gotten from that. Believer that Israel's future depends on a living in peace with a Palestinian state and making peace with its neighbors. I'm obviously not a fan of Donald Trump at all. Everybody who knows me knows that. I always kidded that, I'm sure I could find one or two things I agreed with, but they're few and far between. I do happen to think that it may be that what they've done in Iran may be a wise course of action, simply because I think Iran has been a sponsor of terrorism for a long time. I think Iran's proxies between Hamas and Hezbollah and the people in Yemen and their proxies in Syria have been gravely weakened. It's very clear that Israel has had almost unfettered access. And if you could really eliminate Iran's threat as not only a nuclear threat, but as a sponsor of terror throughout the Middle East, I think I would like to see that. People forget that the population of Iran is probably the best educated population in the Middle East. You've got an awful lot of people who could build a very constructive society, but for being ruled by fundamentalist terrorists. And, whether you can have regime change or not, I don't know. But in a perverse way, I'm kind of happy they did what they did. And I know other people in the Democratic Party would disagree with me, and I know the constitutional questions, but if you ask me where we land on this, I think it'd be incredibly spectacular for the rest of the world if you did not have Iran as a rogue state.
Are we losing our fundamental rights here under Trump? When you look at LA, when you look at what's happening across the U.S.?
Absolutely, positively. The notion that they derogate the rights of individuals, the notion that they trample on the Constitution, the notion that he clearly has no comprehension or caring or understanding about what the United States of America is all about is the most frightening thing in my lifetime. And I started by saying, gee, I agreed with him on something. I agree with him on nothing else. I find him, and I've always said Netanyahu is Trump with brains. I just don't, and the optimism I have is I think the last time, he would talk about crazy things and there were people around him who would stop him. He is now surrounded by sycophants who just, agree with whatever he says. And, last couple of weeks ago, he stays up late at night and watches Escape from Alcatraz. And the next morning he announces that, we're going to make Alcatraz a prison again, just based on his whims. I had to laugh. I told the story that when you watch his cabinet meetings and they all go around and praise him with just nonsense. And
Right.
Pam Bondi's the Attorney General of the United States, and she says something like, the President of the United States saved 80% of the American population from fentanyl death just with his leadership. And I told friends, I said, she saved me. I was waiting for a shipment of fentanyl that would have killed me from Ottawa, but thank God President Trump stopped it. I mean, who says things like, it's just nonsense. And by the way, I want the record to show I've never used fentanyl. I wouldn't know how to find it or what it did. But you hear things.
I didn't know what it looked like.
No, I don't know what it looks like. I don't know. But it's just crazy. And they do this every day. And you just sit there and go, there's just nobody home. I think it's so crazy that I think you will see pushback from the American people when the effects of inflation and the tariffs and some of these other policies. I've always said when average people understand this is making their lives better, I think you will see some significant pushback.
What is Jeff Smulyan most proud of?
Well, I think I'm proud of a couple things. I'm proud of my family, my children. I'm proud of the values that we've lived up to and the culture we've created, the things we've stood for. My late father used to say, you'll always do the right thing. And that's sort of something I've always tried to live up to. Do the right thing. Sometimes the right thing is not the expedient thing. Do the right thing, not the expedient thing. And I think I'm proud of those things.
Biggest regret?
Oh, there's a billion of them. I always tell my kids, not buying the Minnesota Vikings, not telling Tyrese Halliburton to sit out the end of the first quarter yesterday. I look at my life and say, Gary, I have a favorite saying. If any one of 10 things that happen, my company would be 1,000 times bigger. And if any one of 10 other things that happen, I'd be sweeping streets somewhere. So I don't have any regrets. I'm very happy with the way my life turned out. I got no complaints.
Well, it's been a pleasure. It's a pleasure knowing you and having your support for what we do over here. So thank you.
Gary, it's a pleasure to get to know you and keep up the good fight.
I'm Gary Snyder. He is not. He is Jeff Smulyan from Emmis Communications. This is the SnydeReport, and we're out.